Hello, everybody. It's Leslie, and you're listening to the interview with Leslie Heaney. This is my first episode back after a 6-week hiatus, and in my opinion, this episode is well worth the wait. Today, I'm sitting down with Betsy Wills, who's the co-author of a book called Your Hidden Genius. She's also the co-founder of a company called YouScience, which is a company that has democratized this formerly very expensive aptitude test. You can take this test and learn what your secret talents and your hidden genius is. In this conversation, Betsy and I talk about this subject of kind of unlocking your hidden genius or your talents. And we talk a lot about what this aptitude assessment actually measures and how, for those who take it, you can actually learn not only what you're naturally good at, but also what kinds of careers are the right match for you. So not only did I sit down with Betsy, who I adore, who's a new friend here in Nashville, but I also read the book and took the test and felt like I had seen a shaman and a therapist and a fortune teller all in one. It's so insightful. It's a fascinating topic, and it's something I think all of you should do. Read the book and take the assessment. And I think after hearing this conversation between me and Betsy, you will want to run out and do just that. So here's Betsy Wills. Betsy, so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to me about Hidden Genius.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me, Leslie.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? So you and I, we've talked about your incredible book. I have not only read it, but I've actually done the assessment within it.
Great.
So I'm so excited about your book and about your assessment and about sharing this with everybody who's listening, because it's been a transformative, eye-opening experience for me. But I think it's so interesting to hear about kind of how you got there and how you made this discovery. You had your own kind of experience with being at a point in your life where you kind of wanted to step back and think about, you know, what your hidden genius was, or where you were, what the next chapter looked like.
Well, it was really an epiphany that I think a lot of people go through. I was fortunate enough, this is back in 2000, to be home with my children. And they were, I was a young mother, I will say, but I looked at a picture of my grandmothers and I realized all of them were either 90 or 100 years old, Ridley's, my husband's, and mine. And I thought, I'm going to live to be 100. Oh my gosh.
That's a lot of time.
And, and I thought, well, I'm, 32. And I kind of had thought at the time, all the important decisions of my life are behind me. I think a lot of people go through that, particularly when you're, mid-children. And so a friend of mine said, hey, you should go do something called Johnson O'Connor, which is in Atlanta. This is back in, again, 2000. So I went down there and they do aptitude testing. And it took 2 days. It was frightfully expensive, but incredibly impactful to me. And so I immediately came back to Nashville, enrolled in a graduate program at Vanderbilt in human resource development. And when I graduated from that, I thought, I'm going to help all these women just like me.
Yeah.
And so I wrote
Which there are
so many.
So many. Yeah.
So many who have gold-plated educations.
Yep.
And, don't feel like that's it, but they're having a hard time reentering or whatever it was. Well, so I wrote a curriculum called the Brain Spa. Okay. And I thought, I'm going to appeal to all these women.
By the way, I like this as a side for you, the Brain Spa.
The Brain Spa.
It's a great name, and it's
Thank you.
So
well,
tell me what you
did. I did get back
did.
into branding after this. But anyway, it turned out the key client group that called me were not women wanting to come back into the workforce. Ironically, they were 40-year-old male lawyers.
Interesting.
So that is when the light bulb went off for me. I was like, oh my goodness, everyone, regardless, at some point or another is going to go through this nagging feeling like I'm not really fulfilling my potential or I'm dissatisfied, whatever it is. So that's the long story of how this started. But by the time I was working in branding and investor relations for an investment firm here in Nashville, computing power had come a long way. And so a long story of how we got here, but we started thinking about how we could help people who were taking so long to graduate, et cetera. And I said, what if it was possible to bring this very expensive analog assessment into an online environment? And as you know, in 2000, we were playing Pong on Atari.
Yeah. Exactly.
And by 2010, it was possible. So we raised a bunch of money and brought it into an online environment, drove the price down to, practically nothing. And now the assessment is available to people everywhere. We democratized it.
Yeah.
So it's now in 25% of all U.S. high schools and over 600 universities. And most importantly, all adults like you and me can access it for, the price of my book, which is $20.
Yeah. No, it's so incredible. And I it's just so interesting though, what you were just saying about, male lawyers at 40, that being a group that was surprising to you. And then you've got sort of the people that are taking a little bit longer to launch in their 20s. I was just speaking with 2 college students that are seniors, and the anxiety around that and next steps. But what this assessment does is really, no matter what your age, to your earlier point, it kind of helps you unravel. You sort of know what you enjoy doing. And most of us sort of know kind of what we're good at doing, but it's very hard to translate that into a tangible profession.
Right. Well, if you'll allow me, I'll go back a little bit and say, understanding aptitudes have been around since the 1920s.
Yeah.
So long history of that. The military's used them in many ways because they wanted to determine, who do we train, who can learn fastest to do things like fly a plane or jump out of a plane or navigate a plane. And those are 3 different sets of aptitude patterns. So the problem has been that high schools in guidance have used something that you probably took and I took called the interest survey. Okay. Are you familiar with that? I mean,
no, I never even, one of the things I find so striking is how resourceful this is and helpful this would be, and how until what you've been doing, at least in my experience, having gone to private school, and maybe it's different, different schools have different offerings, but I never had that kind of exposure.
Okay. Well, in most high schools and private and in employees. Employees get this too.
Myers-Briggs I've taken before, but not the survey that you're talking about. Yeah.
So it's self-report. It asks you questions like, Leslie, do you like building cabinets? Do you like inventing new cures for cancer?
Right.
It's crazy. I mean, who would know at 17 or even 37 if what they really like doing based on a survey? And then it generates this report that is recommending jobs like, funeral mortician, forest ranger, doctor, lawyer.
I wonder what the funeral mortician question would be to lead one.
But anyway, anything that's based on self-report should not really be used to guide you, only that to be used to guide you on your job choices. And neither should Myers-Briggs or Enneagram. We've been using good tools for conversations, but inadequate tools for career guidance.
Well, you talked a little bit, but I think sort of distinguishing for people the difference between kind of what we like to do. Because if you had that survey and you gave it to me, it was like, do you like to sing? I'd be like, I love to sing. Doesn't mean I should be doing that professionally, right? So it's like,
do that in the shower.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a Saturday night, you have car karaoke. So how would you really describe, though, for people what aptitude is, or what that distinguishing thing is about it versus kind of what you have an affinity for doing?
Right. So you have interest in lots of things. That is very important, by the way, when you choose careers. But aptitudes are assessing you on your innate inborn abilities. Think of them as your brain's hardwiring.
Right. Okay.
And if you're a parent, you really understand this by just watching your child or having 2 children and how different they can be. But for example, one of 52 aptitudes, by the way, that can be tested, and people just don't realize this, would be a spatial ability. So, the child who's building the Taj Mahal out of Legos at, 6 is indicating an early spatial ability. But, the other child you may have who has no interest in that at all and doesn't, you don't even know what they're building. It's just a pile of bricks. That's probably someone who doesn't have a spatial ability. But again, there are 52 different abilities that can be measured. So everything from, reasoning skills, some are very cognitive, and then others are physical. Like some people are very good at working with small tools. This is very important if you're going to be a surgeon, for example, or a dentist. Some people recognize color. Like they can just see the difference between oyster white and cream or
Right.
whatever. And, they in fact give that kind of assessment when you go work for Porter Paints or carpet companies. Exactly. So anyway, there are 52 aptitudes that can be measured. In our assessment, we focus on 14 because they're not really all created equal.
Interesting. And so what are the 14? I mean, maybe there are too many to list, or what are the ones that sort of are at the top of
in the book, we talk about the core 4.
Right.
But when someone buys the book, they can get a code to take the assessment included, and they'll be assessed on 14. But the core 4 would be sequential reasoning, which is how you the logic aptitude, if you will. Some people mentally have a file cabinet in their head, and it's easy for them to make plans mentally, and other people need tools like filing cabinets and calendars, that kind of thing. And these are not good or bad. Spatial abilities, number 2, we talked about that. Then inductive reasoning, which affects people at work in a huge amount. Inductive reasoning is your ability to draw a conclusion under time pressure where there's a lot of ambiguity. So if you've ever played Connections on the New York Times, and they give you, pick the 4 things that go together. It's very much a game like that is the way the test works. And you're given 6 pictures and you have to pick which 3 go together. Inductive reasoning is, that speed of decision making where there's a lot of ambiguity. And so we assess that. The last one, I'm sure you have, because I actually looked at your scores, and I have as well, which is called idea rate. And so...
Oh, right, yes.
Do you remember?
Yes.
So this is literally a measure of the rate at which you come up with ideas. And Leslie, yours is very, very fast.
That's so interesting that you... Anyway, keep going. Because
so we're looking at people who have a fast rate of ideas. And by the way, we're not measuring the quality of your ideas. They may all be terrible.
Exactly.
Okay.
I bet I don't know if you got to see the breakout session of my ideas, but when it was a time that I'm like, I kept,
coming up with them.
They were not, a lot of them were,
Well, it's like a blender with the top off.
Right. Exactly.
In your case, it's like spewing everywhere. I don't know if you have to have a glass of wine at night and shut it down, but it's, fast. So teachers have this, journalists have this, podcast hosts have this oftentimes, writers, consultants often have this. You don't want your pilot or your surgeon to have this. Okay. You don't want your surgeon coming up with new ways to sew you up, coming up with new ideas all the time. You want them focused on that. And it's not ADD, but it is back to with aptitudes. It's neither good or bad if you have them. Most people's pattern looks more like a soundboard.
Okay.
Beautiful music is made with a combination of highs and lows.
Right. You talk about in the book just also the concept you've got aptitude, then you have amplifiers of your different aptitudes.
Right.
So I like that soundboard description that you just gave. Yeah.
So they're not all created equal. They're, in various patterns. But those patterns tell us, instead of just you can be anything, why don't you look at this group of things that you might consider doing because you're going to love them. You're going to find a lot of satisfaction, and your learning rate will be very quick if you're using your aptitudes in your work that are matched to these patterns.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think people, young people, and even, at least myself at different points in my professional life, sort of thinking, what am I, quote, meant to do? I think kids feel that pressure of finding out what they're meant to do. Mm-hmm. And I think what was so interesting for me about taking this assessment, because at the end, after you go through the testing and then you get your report, which is so detailed, I felt like I was going to a fortune teller. I mean, I really felt like it was like a therapist and a fortune teller and a guide and everything else sort of rolled into one. But they, at the end, kind of spit out sort of a whole host, like at least a dozen different careers that would be a match for your aptitudes. Right. And they're really, at least in my case, and I'm assuming this is probably the case for a lot of people, pretty diverse.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, the same aptitude pattern, for example, for a fine art photographer is the same for a high-end restoration contractor, is the same for a department store manager, in fact.
Interesting.
So aptitudes are the, starting point, and then the key is to explore. But the key is not to be exploring randomly in the dark, zigging and zagging all the time, but to kind of give you a narrower band to then look into to see where your interest actually may lie. So aptitudes precede interest, but it's been the opposite for a long, long time because we didn't have the way to test aptitudes at scale.
Right.
And that's really what this is about. Yeah.
But I think, so when you were talking about when you went to get your own testing, right? And had that kind of aha moment, that was the same test that's in this book.
Yes.
This is not like you trying to create a new science.
We did not come up with this.
It's about you democratizing access to this. And then coming out of that, what were the recommendations for you? Was it to go work in finance and doing that?
I did have numerical ability, but it really, for me, it's high inductive reasoning, the ability to make a decision under time pressure, which a lot of people who like to solve problems, that's really what that comes down to. But also high idea rate. So marketing was a good fit for me. Writing, I enjoyed writing. So, communications, that type of thing was a good fit. But I liked working in an area where numbers were involved. So I was not doing the investing, of course, but I had to explain our investments to our investors. And so that was fun to be in an area where numbers were involved, but I was really on the marketing and investor relations side of things.
Well, that's some things I think is so interesting because you and I've talked about this before, is that in the assessment, it kind of can debunk some of your own preconceived notions about yourself or assumptions. Like, for example, I'm, quote, bad at math. Well, actually, that would be an assumption that I made by myself. And I think that my report would probably be in concert with that. But as you were saying to me, that is not necessarily, like, I think people sometimes shut down certain career paths, right? Because they think that it includes things that they're not quote good at, but they're within different disciplines, like math, for example. Math is not the same thing as interpreting a report of numbers, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, I'm not great in math, but I like numbers. I like trends. I like trend analysis. I love data. So most people get shut down about math because either they have a poor math teacher or they interpret math as higher math.
Right.
I'm not that.
Right.
But applied math, which we also assess, which we assess both in the assessment, applied math and higher math, really. And some people do really well at the applied math portion, but not the higher math. And they're surprised. And I'm like, no, don't be afraid of math. Math fear is what I'd say. Women, though, the fascinating thing about the data, we've assessed over 4.5 million people now. So we have a lot of information and data. But women tend to make their career choices based on what's, a lot of them based on what they've been exposed to and socialized around.
Right. Right.
And that's really the game changer for a lot of people using this assessment. They're like, wait a minute, I could, be something, not just a teacher or nurse or whatever it is. And nothing's wrong with those careers if that's actually where you fit. But what happens is people leave a lot on the table because they make these decisions sort of in a vacuum too early. And so their self-understanding is not as clear as it could be. And so no matter what age you are, taking this will kind of open your mind to, wait a minute, maybe I could, try this or try that and be successful.
So I remember you talking about that as well and saying that women or females are sort of have a proclivity or more inclined in their aptitude side in computer science.
Yes. Yes.
Which is not, and there are so few women that are actually in computer science.
And
like as an example of your comment about kind of us women sort of tending towards careers that they have sort of been more socialized to think is the right fit, when in fact they might have their aptitude might be telling them something totally different.
Right. I mean, the outcome is a huge amount of confidence to try something because you're going to see very clearly, yes, you do have the aptitude to do this. Why don't you explore it? So that's key. And then let's talk about the avocations.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Because this doesn't just apply to your job. I think most of us have bought into the myth that there's one perfect job. There's not, okay? But when you understand what your aptitudes are, you can see what you may have left on the table and what you need to maybe nurture to make that job you're doing for paid work more satisfying. Maybe it's taking a pottery class on the weekends or volunteering to be the treasurer at your, church or volunteer organization. I mean, there's lots of ways to use them. I started an art blog, which had nothing to do with, work in investor relations. And I've gotten so much joy out of that. And I wasn't going to find an outlet for that in paid work.
So interesting. You do talk about that in the book. And I thought that was such a important point to make, is that, I think we all do sort of compartmentalize. Someone was saying, or I read something about that we should all be approaching our life like preschoolers.
Camp.
Yeah, exactly. You have a nap, but you're doing art and you're doing music, or you're exposing yourselves to these different parts of your brain or kind of parts of your soul. And I love that, discussing that if you have these aptitudes and you have these sort of natural affinities for certain things, or I guess not affinities, but talents for certain things, and you don't have to do it all in one from 9 to 5 at your desk. They can be things that you're doing on the weekends, or your hobbies, or your volunteer work.
Absolutely.
To help kind of fulfill those parts of you that are not being fulfilled at work. But I do love the idea that these 40-year-old male lawyers, I think, being a recovering lawyer myself, the thought is when you go to law school, you're like, I'm going to be a lawyer, and you can apply it because it's the law, but it's actually, it isn't. You kind of have to find your type of practice. Yeah. And so I love that some other people have had a similar kind of, epiphany that maybe this is not.
But, I always tell people, don't put your job on the witness stand and interrogate it like you're the problem. I think a lot of people's, call it depression or wanting to quit. It could be that they have a bad boss, or maybe they truly are miserable. But usually it's an aptitude they've discounted or left on the sideline, and they need to draw that out and find a use for it. So
that is, they could find that outside of work
ways.
And be satisfied, even sort of satisfied within work.
Well, or, pivoting their practice maybe a little bit, like someone with a spatial ability who's in law. Law is very abstract.
Yeah.
But there's quite a few lawyers who have spatial abilities, and maybe they would enjoy, getting more clients in real estate development, for instance, or something manufacturing or patent law.
Yeah, interesting.
Or, I knew lawyers who would go buy broken toasters at garage sales, and they'd come home and put them together and take them apart and put them together on the weekend just because it made them happy to do that. Or, so there's lots of ways. I know that sounds silly, but.
No, it doesn't. I think actually for my own, in reading your book, it really had me reflect upon my own kind of career and professional journey. And the things I enjoyed about practicing law, I practiced family law, matrimonial law. I enjoyed the contact with my clients. I enjoyed
this is sort of similar.
Navigating, helping them navigate through things. I didn't mind writing briefs. I hated doing research. I hated reading sort of like really kind of obtuse. Anyway, there were so many things I hated about it.
Right.
And I knew that it was, anyway, I could go on and on. Should we get a sofa here and a thing? But I feel like, it was so interesting for me to read the assessments that from your book, that my own report, because it really kind of honed in the things that I liked about that job were the things that I had an aptitude for.
Absolutely.
And the things I didn't were the things that I really didn't like about that job.
Right. I mean, why not just get off the struggle bus? Is
right.
What we always say. Just, doing things that feel like an uphill battle are really, hard. But I would not say that, you don't have to do things that are hard. We do. But when you can see clearly with your aptitude pattern why that's harder for you, or why you have to spend more time in that area, you can start to either offload those activities as much as possible, or make time when it's something that is going to be a struggle for you, and understand what's going on, and that's okay, because there's no perfect job. We can't just like, I can't do that. But when you understand the why, you can tolerate it a lot better and diminish the impact that it may be having on you, is what I'd say.
Well, one of the things I thought was really interesting too about the book is how you sort of set up to how you got to where you are now, in terms of sort of the history of how Americans have approached kind of career counseling.
Right.
And so there is a long, really fascinating history, right?
Yes.
Back, was it Mark Twain that had his, can you tell that Mark Twain story that's in the book?
Yeah, well, that's just apocryphal kind of. He went to get, the fact is we have been using inadequate sets of tools.
Yeah.
Okay. And we've effectively brought career management and guidance only recently out of the dark ages and into the data age. I mean, just like medicine, you expect that data will give you better outcomes. And that's the same with careers. Mark Twain, though, we talk about it, we start the book with the story because it's true. He went to see a phrenologist.
Right.
And it's hocus pocus, really. They would feel your head and diagnose, who your personality and abilities were.
But by the way, I love that he also was questioning what.
Of course he was.
What he was.
Everyone.
What is exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
Everybody has the need. So he went under an assumed name, and they started feeling his head, and they were like, "Oh, this is a bump here and a cavern here in your brain." Just feeling his skull. And they said, "Oh dear, there's no sense of humor here whatsoever." And I mean, he was under an assumed name. And then he goes back to the same person as Mark Twain, I think 4 months later. And the man's like, "Oh my goodness, feel this enormous sense of humor bump that you have." So it's just, we've come a long way. And there really are scientific ways now to assess our natural abilities. And, our mission with the book and YouScience is to, tell you the good news is we can give you a much more refined sort of your possibilities.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And I know you mentioned that it's in schools, and isn't it so the entire state of Georgia?
Yes.
The public schools, right? And how have they found?
We're in every state, but
but they're doing it kind of universally.
They really pioneered
right?
it with our company. That's where it started. But now, it's everywhere. So 25% of all U.S. high schools are using it now.
It's incredible.
And growing, thank goodness, is really the thing. But the mission with my book is we had so many parents who would call or say, "Why I wish I'd had this." And the thing about aptitudes is after we're 17, they don't change. After we're
when you
puberty.
talk about that, you and I talked about this in an earlier conversation. It's fascinating to me.
Yes. So aptitudes are fixed after we finish puberty. But again, these are not skills. They're the seeds of our skills.
Right.
So you can deploy them in many different ways all your life with learning new things, whatever that is, but they should be in alignment with your aptitudes. So yes, you're a lawyer, but that, you can see that's not the only one career that you could have, but you are best and are attracted to using the same set of aptitudes in different ways. So you can take this at 17, 37. We even have people in the book who took it at 79 years old.
Yeah.
And one of them had taken it. He's the White House usher, actually, or the former one. And he had taken it 30 years ago at Johnson O'Connor, like I had. And so we said, well, would you take it again, using the YouScience online, because it's the same assessment. And of course, he scored exactly the same. So that's the good news.
Yeah, it's so how is, it's deployed, it's in schools, and how are the schools using it? So the kids, they get their report, which
Right.
Everyone who's listening, once you take it, I was just telling a friend about it. I couldn't get over the level of detail.
Right.
I mean, I wish I had it with me. I left it 27 pages or 30. I mean, it's really incredibly
you get like
thorough.
a 50-page report. You also get reports for helping you write your resume, talk about yourself, interview. I mean, there's a million tools. It opens up sort of, as you saw, an online kind of career portal that you can come back to 10 years from now. Because, when we're making career decisions, it's very episodic. And so we wanted it to go with you instead of be trapped in a counselor's office.
Well, one of the things I had recently gone to go speak to a friend's class that of her she's a college professor, and I took the assessment after the fact, and I noticed that one of the careers was school administrator or teacher, and I'm like, because I loved it. I guess I left. I said to my husband, I really enjoyed that. I wonder if there's it was really interesting to see that was one of the careers that spit out after I took the assessment. I mean, I really think it's such an exciting and tool, and just incredibly impactful for particularly young people, but people, that are kind of at their midlife saying, I'm trying something different, doing podcasting.
I mean, everybody, I mean, I was, again, 32 when I took it the first time, but, I go back to my results often as I'm making any kind of decision. And in my marriage, we use the results. Well, oh man, because I mean, it's not just about your job. It's about how you relate to people, how you lead, how your team works. You can find out so much about that by just understanding your own aptitudes and then not looking at other people as a flawed version of you. Okay.
Yes.
It's really, Leslie, it's about empathy and love.
Interesting.
Yeah. Looking at your children, like, all that potential, but not, putting them in a box of what necessarily, but looking at what their options might be and encouraging them to explore them not to make a decision too quickly, but to really find that marriage and their fit.
That is so fascinating. I emailed my report to my husband. And I said, would you read this? This is nuts. I mean, this is like, I went to a, again, like a fortune teller and a therapist and a shaman. I mean, I felt like I was covering past lives, future lives. And he was blown away by how accurate he felt it was.
And he knows you.
Right. I just thought it was really, really fascinating. So in school, let's take Georgia as an example because they've rolled it out statewide.
Yeah.
Are they then, they're taking this, the students are taking it, and then are the high schools there trying to help guide them to what would be a good
Yes. And
fit?
again, however many high school students there are in the United States, it's huge. And a huge number of these people go to four-year universities and on to professional schools after that. And then a huge number are CTE students, career and technical education students.
Right.
And that is a really incredible thing because it doesn't just say, the results you can sort by how much education do you think you really want to have or what can you afford. There's a lot of ways to sort the career suggestions based on who you are, where you are. Up to you. How motivated are you? Or, what do you want to do? So they're using it to help students make decisions around their next education level post high school, whether it is CTE or four-year college, et cetera. And so some of the things that YouScience also offers is certifications. So for someone who doesn't actually want to move to a four-year university, they could get a certification and get to work right away. But again, if you are someone who wants to do a four-year education, it's going to, guide you towards that as well. So it's not one size fits all.
That's so interesting because I do know a lot of younger people, late 20s, 30s, who will have 3 different master's degrees. I'm not kidding. In different fields. And then they end up going to do something
totally different.
Right. And so it's so interesting. That's why I was curious about how they're using it because I think in so many instances, people coming out of college, people we talked about earlier, people even our age, are not always they don't really know what they want to do or what they're meant to do. And so you sometimes you just try on the different hats and see what kind of fits. But this is so exciting because it's giving them the tools to help kind of narrow down those.
Just try to narrow, not have as many zigzags as they do. The people who most often call me, honestly, are 26-year-olds who somehow didn't get this. And it's sort of like they test out different things and they feel like they should know and they've spent all this money in college and, the end of the road is not there. Just because you major in something doesn't mean you can't, change, of course. But what we do want is for people to at least know themselves well enough to, pick a major that can be applied into some skill as you grow. Careers are really not chosen. They're constructed. And it's over a long period of time. That's the truth. But you don't want to be just wandering around in the dark all the time. And this really brings that clarity and confidence.
Oh, 100%. Mm-hmm. And I think, looking at how Jeff Bezos, I obviously am not, or one of these visionaries, Elon Musk, but AI obviously is, going to play a big role in the job market it already sort of is a little bit. It's going to continue to be.
Definitely.
And so we're all going to need to be pretty flexible and be willing to pivot right into different fields. And so kind of having this roadmap, and this tools to sort of know.
It's equipping you with the class we really should be taking in college, which is in high school, which is how to manage your career.
Right.
It's not necessarily to pick your career. It's how am I going to manage this? Because we don't even know what the job's going to be in 10 years. And that's getting, more and more of a drumbeat now that, this feeling of obsolescence or fear. And this gets you back to center. Who am I? What are the skills that I can develop in myself? What are the seeds of those skills that I can keep deploying to meet that marketplace in the best way I can?
So when the 26-year-old comes to you and it's kind of lost, right?
Yeah.
I love what you just said about learning how to manage your career. What is the guidance that you give to them in terms of, career management?
Right. Number one, people don't know how to talk about themselves. And so this gives you the tools to do that. There's all kinds of reports. Again, when you take this, I would say start with an assessment like this, understand who you are. But then take those examples of things that you felt in the flow that match your aptitudes and start learning how to talk about yourself in a way that makes you appealing to the marketplace in general. And then really the key is getting unstuck by exploring. I always tell people have 100 conversations. I know that's daunting, but if you do have 100 conversations with people, I mean, your close circle and on out, you're going to learn a lot. The thing that people do is they default. They don't make choices. They actually default, because defaulting is when you don't have choices in front of you that are real.
So defaulting, an example of that for you might be, someone going on 5 different job interviews and got an offer from a company and
taking the first one.
Right.
I mean, would you marry the first guy you kissed? Right. Yeah. Sorry. But I mean, what people do is they get desperate.
Yeah.
And so they just take something and then they're miserable and then they jump out of that, fire into the frying pan over and over and over again. It becomes a habit of defaulting instead of taking stock and really, truly exploring and creating, if you have to create 3 job offers, that's hard work.
Yeah.
I agree. But you're going to make an actual decision when you have 3 options. Whereas if you have 1 option, that's really a default.
I love the 100 conversations. When I mentioned that I spoke to my friend's class, one of the things, a lot of the questions from students were about, not knowing what their next step was, things along those lines based on the course that she was teaching. And I said, you're in a really unique position because you're in college, you're a young person, and people love talking to young people.
Oh, they're happy to.
Yeah. But I think people love talking to anybody.
Yeah.
In my experience, for example, in starting this podcast, which was really kind of a bit out of nowhere, I used to moderate this symposium for New York Presbyterian, and the same sound guy, Steve would always hook up them every year. And I came, I finished and I went to have the microphone taken off. He's like, you're good at this. You should really have a podcast.
Right.
And I thought, gosh, I really enjoy preparing for these symposiums. Maybe I should try that. And I can barely, Betsy knows I got lost here because I was looking at one
your aptitude pattern
screen.
Is perfect for this job, Leslie. It's perfect.
But it's just I have no business doing anything like online or like I can't follow a map. Obviously, I went to the wrong place this morning. But it's interesting when you just kind of realize that you don't have to have all the skill sets for that particular job, right? You can sort of find the thing within your aptitude that is a match, and then fill the other parts
offload
in.
the other, or, outsource the other, whatever it is. Exactly, right.
Reaching out to people to have the conversation, or asking someone, if you just ask someone for advice, I think uniquely young people could sort of talk to anybody, because people want to help college students and younger people, but even midlife folks like myself. I feel like I sort of,
keep talking. You may end up in a new career after today. But let's talk about the 100 conversations, because what I always advise people, I'm like, call your aunt or call your next door neighbor and just say, my goal is to have 100 conversations. Okay. And then the heat is off that person, because they're not being asked to worry about what your job's going to be.
Yes.
And
or to connect you with somebody.
But they do, because they're invested. So when you start it off and just say, you know what, my goal is over the next month, I'm going to have 100 conversations. And so I just want to ask you a few things about what you do. And then, hey, if you know anybody else I should speak with, let me know. And they'll be like, oh, yes, call so-and-so, call so-and-so. Then all of a sudden, you have all this team on your team, and they're thinking about you. And they're going to say, I think you'd be perfect for this role, and they're going to recommend you. Most of our, jobs are actually gotten through loose ties.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But you've got to get out there and you've got to talk. But you don't have to be in a subservient sort of like, please, can you help me?
Yeah.
We're just talking.
I love that. I love the importance of how the person who's asking for the conversation frames the ask.
Frame it, right.
Because, if people know that there's 99 other people that are doing this too,
they
don't feel like there's any, particular pressure. And the person that's having the conversation is learning so much from the person that they asked.
Well, and you've got college age or
about to be,
Think about how much work it is to apply for college.
I know.
Well, if people put even a scintilla of that much work into looking for their job, they would end up in a great spot. But somehow or another, this
Interesting.
ends, when you're out of college, it's expected like, okay, there's going to be a magical job that lands on you. No, you have to work at that just like you did to get into college, but it can be fun,
Well, I think what's interesting too is that, and it's more and more, if you talk to college counselors, for example, they're like, you have to frame, or you have to sort of tell your story. Who are you to the college admissions person?
Right.
Which is asking a lot of a, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old. Then they get to a liberal arts college. Maybe they think, you know what, I really want to major in, I don't know,
this or that. Yeah.
Whatever it is, biology, because I think I want to be a doctor.
Oh, 50% of the Wake Forest's class enters going to be pre-med.
Isn't it? So
about 8%.
When we were touring different colleges, it was tons of computer science, which is actually terrific. I mean, these are all things that we need, but it was interesting to me. And then the one kid, they'd go around the circle asking what your major was or what your interest was.
Yeah.
And then you'd have the one kid out of the 12 that would say undecided. Everyone kind of turn to them like, what is going on? And it was just as if they were confessing like the most like horrible thing. No. But it shouldn't be. It should be, as you said, it's such a great way to think about it is, for them to spend as much time also in college. I think college, sometimes they're scrambling, thinking I have to have that internship so I have a job when I graduate.
Yeah.
So figuring out the timing and how people can use this tool.
Well, again, this will help you describe yourself and to kind of narrow down this tyranny of choice that comes with the message, you can do anything. Okay?
Yeah.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, yes, you can with practice, but why would you?
Right.
So that's not a really good message. You should be anything.
So that's, I always say to my kids,
passion.
I'm like, which by the way, that saying, follow your passion, I feel like is such a hard message because you're, at least this was my own experience. Yeah. So like, I'm not quite sure exactly what that is.
No, I say bring passion
to
your work. Okay. Find something where you can bring your passion. And so spend time knowing yourself and then exploring first. I mean, we don't have a talent gap in this country.
Right.
What we have is an exposure gap.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that is also, as I mentioned, with my own report, one of the things for me that was so terrific about thinking about the different ways these reports can be deployed is that you're looking at all of the different options that are things you might have never even heard of. And if you're a young person who's thinking about, do I go to a vocational school? That might make the most sense because I really enjoy that and I'm good at it, as opposed to continuing to get a liberal arts degree in something that I may never enjoy
as you saw
or pursue.
On the setup, you can see what the average salary is, where the jobs are, what states those jobs are in, what does this job do? There's a lot of information after you take the assessment on that platform that gives you clarity of just like, what is this? You don't even have to call someone. You can read about it first.
Well, what I love too about the book, and everyone listening has to run out and buy the book because you will love the book. It's really it's just like getting a kind of a window into yourself.
Yeah.
You start reading and it kind of explains kind of the background and what is happening. And then you stop and you take the assessment.
Right. Chapter 3, page 28. Yeah.
And then you read through. But it was, for me, such a great read. And but by the way, you are a terrific writer, and so is your co-author,
Alex. Yes,
Ellison. I was really, I was really quite impressed by just, oh my gosh, this is your first book, and it was just a page turner, and I was engaged, and it was great, and incredibly, as I mentioned, transformative for me. And the report is, I feel like I should give it to my children, give it to my parents,
give it to your husband. Yeah, well, I'm glad you gave it to your husband. I mean, it really can open up some nice conversations.
Well, now I want him to take it because I know what I think, the different pieces to that puzzle are, but it'd be interesting for him to sort of think, gosh, maybe that does explain why.
Did I tell you about my husband's results?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, just an example. My husband has perfect pitch, which we actually is not related to music. It's related to your ability to discern really fine differences in things. Like, that's crooked, this doesn't taste right, that's off. It can be sound, but it's so many other things. And I am a 98%er. I will leave that wine glass out by the sink at night.
Yeah.
I'll get that in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, all he sees is what's off. And so he would come in and be like, why is the house so dirty? Looking at the one wine glass. And I would be like, I am really, this is not going to work between us at all. But when we found out that that was one of his aptitudes, then we really understood why it was.
Yes.
That's where his eye was going, in the house. And it took the personal aspect of it away. I still said, please don't criticize me.
I love that this can be used for, career development and marriage counseling.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. It really can be. So, the growth is in every part of your life, not just your career.
Well, it is an incredible book. It is an incredible sort of service that you're doing for our communities and our country, because I think it is something that so many people struggle with. Mm-hmm. And as you said, people often, they're depressed or they just feel, like they haven't really found their why, as the young people like to say. I've all of these 20-somethings being like, what's your why? I'm
what's
like,
your why? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, but now I have so much more information and tools and guidance on how I can talk about my why. But it really is a tremendous service. I am just a huge fan and a real advocate of people going through this process and taking this test and buying your book.
I invite all your listeners to do it. And as you know, there's a code on the back of the book.
Yes.
Every book has one code to take the assessment, which is a great deal because if you go online, it's $49.
Right.
But the book you can just buy and it includes that.
Yes.
So.
No, I got my code. Mm-hmm. Again, seeing that that's not one of my aptitudes, figuring out how to do those things. There's also a help desk, which helped guide me.
A help desk, yeah.
But I know that 99% of the people listening will be able to do it without the help desk. But it was, as I said, such a helpful exercise for me, and I think it's going to be so helpful to everyone who takes it and who buys the book. So, Hidden Genius by Betsy Wills and Alex Ellison. And Betsy, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about it today.
Thank you.
So fun always to see you.
You too.
That brings us to the end of this episode of The Interview. Huge thank you to Betsy Wills for joining us. And as always, thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We release a new episode every Wednesday. So until next Wednesday, this is Leslie, and thank you for joining The Interview.